All right, we're gonna go ahead and start. Oh, Thursday's gonna be sunny. Yeah. I'm giving exams all day. All right, we're gonna talk about vitamins and hopefully turn it on. And so this is what I kept saying, I'll talk about it. And you guys already know my answer to this, and a lot of you may have made a transition during this term. I do believe supplements are helpful when you're going through a serious issue, say like cancer or something, to help you to get over the hump. But really you need to be whole food. And hopefully you've been noticing. Do you guys need the lights off or we're okay? Whatever. All right. This was one of my favorite ads that I found when I was trying to find a picture for the background. And so this is probably from the 40s or 50s. And so this is maybe it's before that. It's B1 was called B1 because it was the first B vitamin that was isolated. So these donuts, so it's highly processed flours. They take out all the vitamins and then they said, hey, let's put back in B1. But it doesn't quite work that way. All right, and so I love this slide because it's the rainbow that we've talked about, and it is as long as you're eating a wide range of foods, you're not a mono diet where all you eat is kiwi, you're gonna get plenty of everything. But vitamins, this is the definition of what a vitamin is. I think it's part of my first question, which is there's actually apparently 13 of them, and they are chemical compounds. Organic just means they're carbon-based. And we'll see pictures of all of them because she's a chemist, so I'm not afraid of that. And we need them for our cells to work. And so that's like a definition straight from, I think, your guys' nutrition book. I should ask how many people have actually like clicked on the link and opened that book. I did once. There is a link for it up in the upper corner. Oh, you don't have to. Is that right? Textbooks are really outdated because they have a lot of information though. And so we just need them in very micro amounts. So we have the macronutrients, which we spend the first 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks talking about, like carbs, proteins, and fat. And these are part of the micronutrients. And I put them after when I talk about the rainbow, because there's many more than just these. But we don't synthesize them. And they just stopped calling things vitamins. And there we go. There's the list of them that I have to Google every time when I have you guys sign up for them. And I'll talk about the missing B1s. And this is kind of a cute picture because one, they did know they're rainbow, but they also put them showing the different foods. And really, as long as you're eating a wide range of things, it's also on the other side, they're trying to show some of the things they're important for and stuff. And so like A is eye health, we think of. So we're going to walk through them. Oh, this is the other part of the first question is the fat soluble vitamins. So you either have water soluble or fat soluble, and it's actually easier than memorizing A, D, E, K, but vitamins A, D, E, K are hydrophobic. It means they don't mix with water. So they are stored in our fat tissue, our muscles, and our liver, of course, because our liver does everything. You have to eat them with a meal. So if you supplement, like a lot of people supplement with these vitamins, if you don't take it with a meal, nothing's going to happen because you have to have fat with them because they're going to travel around with the fat. And the other ones are water soluble, which is C, and all the B's actually are all water soluble. And so I'll look at those guys second. We're going to look at the fat soluble because the fat soluble are also special. Because one, they have to, as I just said, they have to be, you have to have dietary fat, and then the water soluble are not an issue because our body doesn't actually store them because we're basically water, and so you pee out any extra. The exceptions to that, which is really interesting, is B12, that your liver actually can store vitamin B12. And so it takes a while to know that you actually have a deficiency, which is a good thing. B12 is so important. And whatever that says, sorry, I'm just lining up my arrow. Yeah, so we have to, as long as you're eating a range of food and not getting it in processed food where it's going to be in the wrong form, you're going to get plenty of your vitamins. The issue that we're going to see as I go through these, I'm going to go walk through fat soluble ones first, is the fat soluble ones you can overdose on really easily because your body stores them with fat, and it's specifically from supplements. And so there's a lot of issues with toxicity. The water soluble ones, you pee out all the extra, so there's no way you can over consume them. And so those of you who did do one of the fat soluble ones, you probably did talk about the toxicity. The history is interesting because each vitamin has its own history. The first one isolated was, of course, you may want to take a wild guess, A, because it got the letter A. So B1 would have been next, and it was B. I don't know what if when he called it B1. And apparently it's these guys. They each isolated a different one. These are not them. Thiamine is B1, vitamin C we'll talk about. Niacin is B3, riboflavin is B2. This is though specifically for vitamin C with scurvy. So when they talk about the history, they often talk about when they isolated the molecule, which is interesting. But scurvy is probably one of the first things we realized because it was, I wonder if I mentioned who it was. Yeah, it was this guy, James Lind, back before we became an independent country. And he found that if they traveled, because we were traveling all by sea, that the men all got scurvy, where their gums would start bleeding, which meant the insides of them, and they would die. I mean, you can see the lethargy in them. And so vitamin C I get to and why it's so important, but they noticed that when the men, when they brought fruit with them on board, or like whenever they got, when they were traveling, trying to go around the earth, when they got to tropical areas, a lot of men would want to keep going because they finally were getting like real food and stuff. And all their issues would disappear. They'd have terrible sores all over their legs and arms and stuff because of the vitamin C deficiency. And so to me, that's really the first one, even though they didn't know the idea of vitamin. And then we started processing food. And so it was polishing of rice, which is making white rice. So at the time, this is only about 150 years ago that we started making white rice. And it became that if you could get polished rice, it meant that your family was affluent. And it's really fascinating because so many cultures are anti-brown rice. So especially the Asian cultures, whereas 150 years ago, they all were eating brown rice. Same with the Hispanic cultures. They're very much into the white rice because it shows they're affluent, but most of them don't realize that's why. It's just what they grow up with. And it took me a while to make the change. That was decades ago. And so we had the berry, which Brenda talked about really well before this. Berry was when they figured out it was B1 deficiency, and berry, I don't know if it actually existed, but berry means very, right?
Yeah, very, yeah.
So
Very unwell or.
yeah, they were like something about how are you feeling somewhere. I can't remember. She put it in her paper and it was great. And it just meant very, like, are you ill? And they'd be like very.
Yeah.
And it, right. Then this was the first one that they started isolating. So in 1912 was when they actually fed butter to mice. That's why I have a picture of the butter mice. And that would be one of these guys, but I don't know which one. Yeah, and they became healthier than those who were fed lard. So lard is the drippings off of animal food, which the butter, I guess, is a pretty high, that's the yellow color, the yellow orangish color of butter. And so then it was this guy, Casimir Funk, who coined the term vitamin with vitamin E, and great name, Casimir Funk. And so vita is for vital, and amine was because a lot of them have these nitrogen groups. So like the amino acids, not all of them do, because vitamin C does not. And then we didn't identify the B vitamins until much later, even though we knew thiamine was needed, that it wasn't until they didn't identify the structures until much later. That is because of studies done, that was the rat eating the butter. And so they actually did studies, and the rats that got the peanut butter survived and the ones who didn't. And so there's a list again of the vitamins and some of the sources, which I think, did you talk about? That's interesting. I didn't notice that until right now, because you did green tea and then you did vitamin K. And then these are the minerals, which I'll also touch on briefly. So we're going to walk through the vitamins. We're going to start with A. All right. Oh, and this was, I had debated about having you guys watch a video about the whole supplement business. The supplement business, because it's not a drug, it's not regulated at all. And I've mentioned that. And so I just want to mention that again, and it is actually growing exponentially. It's the fastest growing business there is. And I can't remember, I remember reading the numbers, and which is really scary. And a lot of people don't know that this is where toxicity comes in, because they think a little bit is good, and it's not. With food, you can't have these issues. Where are we going? Yeah, so we have this choice that these are, your supplements are pretty much controlled by mega companies. And so we see these different names like Renew Life or Neocell, and that's actually from Clorox, as in who makes bleach. And so they're very clever. They spend a lot of money on marketing. A lot of these were actually independently owned by, like, say, a chiropractor or somebody. And then look at there, Pfizer owns Emergency now, as well as Centrum. That's not a surprise, is it? But they're all owned by these mega companies. And Pfizer is a drug company there. They got in on it. But if you look at some of these, it's quite fascinating. And so it's just big business is what it is. And that's the growth. And they're expecting it to keep growing quite a bit every year over the next 10 years. But the difference in the first 10 years, I guess I don't have it. I want to go back on that. That also shows one of the things that's interesting to me is the vitamin hasn't really increased. It's increased a little bit, but like botanicals and stuff. What's interesting to me is this protein and amino acid. It should be like quadruple that, because the amount I see people believing if they supplement with proteins, that's going to make them have bigger muscles. It's quite fascinating to me. Especially if you walk into a health club. So vitamin A, when I think of vitamin A, because the next questions just have us walk through each of the vitamins and write down probably more than one word would be really helpful if you guys are expecting to get full credit for the assignment today. But when I think of the word vitamin A is a carotenoid, and that's because it's found in carrots, but really anything that is red, orange, or yellow is loaded with vitamin A. And so that's what this picture, and they're so vibrant. And these guys are out of season right now, the persimmons, but apparently there's the pink lentils that you can actually find anywhere. And then they're actually a family of over 600 of them. They keep finding new ones, and only one of them makes vitamin A. So beta carotene is the precursor to vitamin A, but they actually say all of these belong to the carotenoids. And they're all really important for more than just your eye health. But it's hard to see, and most of you have not had chemistry, but they do have very similar structure. All their structures are mirror images if you look. And then there'll just be like one little thing that's different. Vitamin A comes from this and specifically cleaves it in half. Our body does somewhere. Yeah. And so these are different forms of vitamin A that are made from beta carotene. And one of them is provitamin. Yeah, and we have to consume it through our diet and with fat in our diet. And which is interesting, since it's really found in all these food sources, which don't have fat because they're vegetables and minerals. But the big thing I think of with carotenoids, vitamin A, is your eye health. So the gal who talked about vitamin A, she said, her mom said, you're going to go blind because you're staring at your phone all the time. And so she kept eating lots of carrots, but I absolutely love carrots. But it's really anything that has that orange-ish color. And so she did talk about this, that long term, the blue light is your computer screen, your phone screen, does lead to your eye health. So macular degeneration and blindness is not a good thing, and it's quite on the rise because of our consumption of the blue light. And these two molecules, which are two of the carotenoids, are actually found in our eyes, and they're the ones that absorb blue light, and we're just overexposing. Vitamin A is also an antioxidant. And I got into a weird discussion with a 12-year-old who's super bright in my one class, and I can't remember what it was about. They kept saying it was an antioxidant. And we use this word for everything now. But these are the ones that fight all the free radicals, and it's because they have extra electrons to do it. Not everything is an antioxidant, but vitamin A is A, C, and E are antioxidants of the vitamins. None of the other ones are that I know of, but I think vitamin K now they think has some. And it actually is really good for your lung health. So a friend of mine, we went to see a chiropractor and it turned out he had just had a long-term like lung infection. And so one of the things she put him on was vitamin A and to help with that. But so I have a picture of this on the next page. So apoptosis or apoptosis, however you want to say it, is that our cells are programmed to die. They're supposed to die once their cycle is done as we keep regenerating new ones. And we need the enzymes. We talked about this with other stuff. And so vitamin A helps this to happen. Cancer cells, for some reason, can avoid this, and so they keep growing and growing and growing. And this is what I already mentioned is everywhere where we see vitamin toxicity, it's going to be specifically the fat soluble ones that ingesting high doses. When we get to the minerals, we're going to see that's an issue also. But it's always through megavitamin therapy, and children will get the container and open it up. I know it wasn't vitamins, it was some drug that my dad, one of his siblings died when they were like 3 or 4, climbed up on the counter. That was before we made pill bottles that you can't open them unless you can figure out how to open them. But back in the day, you could just, probably all of you have a history somewhere in your family of something like that happening. Yeah, so this is toxicity. So most of us think, oh, there's not enough of something. And so more and more and more is better. And it is, again, because they have so many carbons that our body, once it's in, it's going to just be stored and you can have too much. Getting it naturally in your diet, you actually never overdose on it. And so it is those A, D, E, K. And these are just different sources of it. Now, liver is actually really interesting because the amount, I'm pretty sure you can actually overdose on vitamin A from liver, but I'm not sure. Because the amount of vitamin A in liver is like 5,000 times what you're supposed to get. And so you have to be really careful if you eat liver. Like I used to give liver to my cat, and it's pretty disgusting because it's really slimy if you've ever seen liver. But it is something they say to watch out for, that you can't have too much vitamin A. You also get all of these in the liver and stuff. So I had a student last year who actually did his paper on liver and the importance of eating some liver every week or two, because it gives you this mega dose because your liver stores all these vitamins. Oh, vitamin D, right? As soon as you see the sunlight. Vitamin D was misclassified as a vitamin. It's not actually essential. Our body actually can make it, but we could not make it through the past 6 months. And we're pretty much the sun on a sunny day, the sun is coming back, and our skin will actually start synthesizing it. It's a steroid, so that means we're making it from cholesterol. Makes you ponder all these people who are on the cholesterol lowering medications. Vitamin D is so important. So it is actually a steroid, just like testosterone and stuff, but those are made in our reproductive glands. Vitamin D is specifically, there's cholesterol in all our skin cells, and sunlight changes it. So when the sun changes it into vitamin D, and so this bond here is broken, and so it was something, one of the big things with vitamin D has to do with bone health. And so calcium, phosphorus, keeping them in balance for our bones. There we go. And this is from a book I read many, many decades ago. And because somebody even asked us, I think, to Summer when she did her talk on calcium. Or it might have been, and Jenny talked about magnesium, and it's every term. How does the calcium, what's the whole connection between calcium and magnesium? And we don't know. We know you need both as well as phosphorus for your bone health. And they seem to all help each other. The magnesium is, we have high amounts of magnesium in our bones too. Calcium gets all the glory though. And so somehow magnesium helps the calcium. And I like this word. It said it was specifically from this book that I read on nutrition. And so our bones are strong, our teeth and our bones are strong, but it's not just the calcium, it's vitamin D. And so without the vitamin D, our bones are not strong. And so vitamin D deficiency, you get rickets. And so their bones are bent. I think you had pictures of the rickets. I don't, I'm hoping I don't, because it is, so the kids will be bow-legged and stuff. Because their bones aren't forming correctly. And so actually the word rickets came from the word ricken, which means twisted in some Northern European language. And so this is our normal bone. And you can see here, there's just a little bit more missing. There's more holes and stuff. And so their bones end up warped. And so it was during the Industrial Revolution that this happened, because suddenly we had pollution covering the skies and they weren't getting enough vitamin D. And the children, not just that, because suddenly mom was going to work for 12 hours a day, the children were pretty much locked inside. And so they weren't getting outside at all. And, right, and so you started seeing huge amounts of rickets. There we go. And so the skeleton's demineralized, deformed. And again, I already said that. The other big thing, the red ones are the thing, is it's really important for our immune system. And I have a slide in 1 or 2 about COVID and vitamin D, because there was a huge connection. And until they realized Pfizer could make money in another way, which is vitamin D supplements, there was nothing about it for the first year or so in this country, whereas there were tons of articles in India and all of Europe and stuff. And so actually our immune cells have a receptor. So it's actually a hormone. It's not actually a vitamin, but everybody calls it vitamin D because it's just kind of stuck. And there is, and I have a slide about a study that was done. It's also important for coordination of our nerves with our muscles. And so the other place, besides thinking about back in the 1600s with the Industrial Revolution, is in the old folks' homes, that these people don't get outside. They don't get any sunlight. Most of them never get out of bed. And so just getting them outside for sunlight for 15, 20 minutes a day actually helps them with the issue of falling. Yeah. Right, and balance and stuff. And so the idea of going outside and having them do exercise classes, just really simple, and chairs and stuff. Can we imagine how wonderful that would be? Not in the middle of the day when it's super hot, but also MS, so multiple sclerosis is the covering of our nerves that starts breaking down, and there is a connection with vitamin D. There's a lot of connection also with diet, but MS pretty much doesn't happen unless you grow up north of the 45th parallel, which we are north of the 45th parallel. It goes right by somewhere between Salem and Albany. When you go south on I-5, you pass, says you cross the 45th parallel. So the 45th parallel means you're halfway between the equator and the North Pole. And so we're actually a little bit closer to the North Pole. And so MS, pretty much the further closer to the equator you get, you pretty much see no MS. And they thought it was because they ate a lot of coconuts, but they've since realized it has to do with we don't get enough sunlight. Yeah, but there's actually been a lot of research done. The biggest cancer prevention. There are a lot of cancers, again, that become exponentially higher north of the 45th parallel. Breast cancer is a big one. There's also a connection with melatonin that I'll get to. And so the idea of sunlight. And so cancer, colon cancer, huge connection with vitamin D and colon cancer. And I'm thinking there's going to be with a lot of them. And so it's really interesting because you probably were thinking I was going to say, oh, there must be a connection with skin cancer. They've actually estimated we may have created more cancers with sunscreen than we've actually prevented. Because when you put sunscreen on, your body can't make vitamin D. So I'm not saying go out in the middle of the day in the summer because you don't want to get sunburned. That's definitely not healthy. But as Healy had talked about, you really need about 20 minutes of like mid-morning or late afternoon sunlight on your body. And so our fear of the sun, and so if you're going out for the day, if you're somebody who's big into sunscreen, you might as well just wear like a light jacket or something. That's what they do in other places. But you do need some exposure. Go ahead, Brenda.
Doesn't matter how much your skin, like.
You know, it's
any
interesting because it's different in different places you look. So a lot of places, because everyone's afraid of like the face being exposed, right? So they'll often say your hands and feet or something, right? And so, which is, yeah, arms. So, yeah, and the most of them will say like anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, 15, 20 minutes seems to be the number.
Your family will wear some, I mean, like, you wear a ridiculous hat. Ew.
Yeah. I don't usually go walking on the beach in the summer here because it gets really crowded in the summer. I like now when it's rainy. But yeah, there's connection. Estrogens also are made from cholesterol. So when you increase vitamin D, estrogen levels are lower, and so that's the connection with breast cancer. So you actually see a 50% reduction. And so people who live in Hawaii, there's much lower rates, Costa Rica, Mexico. And doesn't mean you still do see breast cancer for creating other issues. And I was going to say prostate cancer is also much lower. And no, I was going to say something. It was something you were talking about. I can't. Maybe as I try to go forward, it's not going to go forward. There we go. Yeah, and so you also find it in fatty things. So here we go. Salmon. I'm not sure why egg yolk, but it's small levels. It is a different form than our body makes, but apparently our body can convert it. But it's really from the sun, and you can never overdose from vitamin D from the sunshine. Your body actually has an enzyme that when you get enough, it stops. We also store vitamin D in our liver, of course, for a time. It's not for 5 years like B12. So we're pretty much, all of us are probably deficient right now because we don't get the sunlight. I also know that the tanning beds, you don't make vitamin D with them. And so there are certain lights that can help. And so there's this guy known as the Sunshine Doctor up in Boston, and he was big about getting these lights put in old folks' homes and nursing homes where people aren't getting out. But if anybody has a lizard or a reptile, you have to get a special light for them because otherwise their spine becomes warped because they need the vitamin D to keep their bones strong. Which is interesting that we do it. And as Brenda had talked about previously, mushrooms actually do have some vitamin D, but there's a lot of questions with the research because it's a different form and they're wondering it's absorbable and all this stuff. But I personally like mushrooms, and you guys are just like every other class that you either love them or you haven't gotten past the texture yet, but you will eventually. Because they're so, like, they have everything. They're this wonderful thing. And so the deficiency is the depression. And so Healy talked about it really well because she was able to talk about her personal experience. So people who do live, I have a student who's from Hawaii, and he had commented the same thing the day before your presentation, that people here are not as friendly as in Hawaii. And I said, well, when you're in a place, you're on vacation, the sun, but even in the summer, people are friendlier, you're in the sunlight more. But there is a connection with vitamin D and serotonin and melatonin levels. Just feeling fatigue and stuff. So seasonal affective disorders, they talk all about serotonin, but there's a link with vitamin D, weakened immune. So I used to actually take cod liver oil. You have to be careful on the source of it in the winter months to make sure I had enough of my vitamin D and stuff. It's pretty gross because it's cod liver oil, but I don't know. But I don't know what the answer is. I do supplement with vitamin D in the winter months for a couple of months. I don't do mega doses because we've gone where we're not giving people enough. And now we're like, oh, more is better, more is better. That probably not. I don't know what the best form is because there seems to be different arguments out there, and I just haven't really looked into it. But your muscle weakness, you lose hair, a lot of autoimmune and cancer I always talk about. And it turns out when you have low vitamin D, your cholesterol is always higher. So which came first? So is it because your body somehow is not making the vitamin D? So you're increasing the cholesterol, trying to get your body to make vitamin D, or vice versa. And right, and toxicity only comes from the supplement. These are some of the things that happen with toxicity is pretty much similar things that you're seeing here, but always you're going to see with all of them with toxicity is heart and kidney damage. And in Chinese medicine, the heart and kidneys are very much related. This is one of these crazy graphs that are interesting to read that has to do with your levels of vitamin D and the severity of COVID. And I think the picture was just more there for me to remind me to talk about it. This was a huge study that was done in Britain, and it came out last year, which is ironic because now, but it's actually still important to talk about because coronavirus is just a man-made cold virus, right? We took a cold virus and we mutated it, changed it a little bit. And so it's true for any year with cold and flu season that cold and flu season is always the winter months. That's when our vitamin D is lower. And if you look at how coronavirus went, it would always taper down in the summertime. And it was much milder in the places that had more sunlight. But this was a study in which they supplemented. There's some flaws to the study, and they looked at, they only gave people who, when they took the pre-serum levels, their blood levels, who had lower than optimal levels of vitamin D already in their blood, did they receive daily one or the other dose of vitamin D, and nobody else did. The thing is, it became then this big thing online that, hey, buy this, it was part of this study. And so in Europe, where this was talked about, huge. So people who had normal levels of vitamin D, they didn't actually supplement them at all. And then you had a control half of the group, which they had no supplements. And the other big flaw is they didn't actually even look at their blood levels before. Yeah, so we don't actually know how many people in the control group were above optimum and below optimum. So to me, it's like, how can we really evaluate these studies? So we see results like when you go on, you hear the news and they report it, they're like, are they really analyzing it? And then they look 6 months later and they they randomly picked it. So obviously there was funding issues with all this, which is fascinating because of how much money a lot of places were making, that you would think that they would want to fund something like this. And it was just periodically they were asked if they visited their doctors for any kind of respiratory infection or if they ever tested positive for COVID. And right, so they were just asked by questionnaire. And what they found was that there was the same number of basically respiratory infections for each group. And the news is reporting it, saying that vitamin D had absolutely no effect on that. But studies that were done in other places where they actually started supplementing vitamin D right away. In fact, very first round of COVID, which would have been 3 years ago right now, when Italy, like right now, we hadn't quite shut down. We shut down on St. Patty's Day. It was when this country was starting to shut down. So it was the end of this week. But Italy was already like in a disastrous area, which is Mediterranean, and they get sunlight, but they don't actually get quite enough in February. So they probably are at lowest, whereas the Northern European countries were not getting it, but they all are socialists. And so everybody gets vitamin D supplements. And so they were pondering, so back 3 years ago, if there was a connection with that. And then India, they were also looking at things like that. But then India got hit really hard by the next round. This is like the crazy, I could never be a statistician who's looking at this stuff, because I'm like going, how do you organize this? It's just somebody random. The control group did not actually even have a placebo. They knew they were the control group. And a lot of them actually went out and bought their own vitamin D and started supplementing with it. And so that kind of took away. So they were kind of aware that they were. And so half of them, right, half of the controls actually went out and bought vitamin D and started taking it, even though they were told you're not supposed to. Because if I was in the control group, I'd be like, well, wait a minute, you're just waiting to see how sick I get. Like you're doing something for the other ones, but even the other ones, they weren't really doing much for. And right, so there were a lot of flaws with a lot of these studies that obviously was also underfunded. And this was interesting that they did about 10% of the control were actually checked their blood levels after. And I don't know what the results were, because the article I read didn't say. It also didn't say of these controls, the name of them have respiratory infections. But this is interesting because 40% of the people on the lower dose and 15% of the higher dose never actually reached. This is the blood level that is considered where we're all supposed to be at. There's also issues with these numbers. Like my vitamin D one was checked 5 years ago was lower than this, but we each have a unique biochemistry, and so maybe our body knows. And we're looking at one point, and these numbers were all based off of 20-year-old men that were tested. So like your iron, what your iron normal numbers are when they get the range, it was a group of like 20 to 25-year-old men, and that's where all these numbers came from. But we do know there's actually lots of studies that show when you have lower vitamin D, you are more vulnerable to infection. And so the question is if it was a valid study. All right, moving on. Vitamin E, which is tocopherol. And there's several of these, which I'll have a picture of in a minute. These guys really, when I think of them, it's in your oils. So it's coming from your seeds and your nuts are really great. And that makes sense because that's fatty. So we talked about essential fatty acids. So vitamin E's big thing that it does is that it helps to keep the oil healthy. So if you go back, whatever, 6 weeks ago, whenever we finally got to the fact, I guess about 2 months ago, about 8 weeks ago, when we talked about the fatty acids, I talked about the polyunsaturated are actually really dangerous because they get oxidized really easily. And so in the form of the oil, they've already been oxidized. And so that was my big push to say, hey, try cooking without oil. I was resistant at first. And once you're able to make the change, you just never go back. And then when you eat food that has oil, you can taste it. And you can taste the rancidity in it. And you can feel it in your body because you're like, huh. And my son has been eating a lot of junk food at the neighbors when he goes over just to chat and stuff. Not junky food, just like chips or something. And he actually had a cold all last week. And then he said, no, it's not a connection. And then he came and apologized in class, like, really, Joey? Really? But anyway, vitamin E is packaged naturally where we have a lot of unsaturated fatty acids, and it is what protects them from oxidative damage. And so that's what vitamin E's big claim to. There's this one doctor I used to listen to a long time ago. I don't anymore because he's just like completely, actually, I have no idea because I stopped listening to him. Was really big into the whole keto thing. And he was somebody who was constantly checking himself to make sure he stayed in ketosis and stuff. But he used to say whenever he cooked something with fat, he would break a vitamin E tablet into it. Like some of you are talking about, when Kimberly talked, she talked about using it on your skin, and her mom would break vitamin E tablets. Now they put it in a lot of stuff. But he would actually, anytime he cooked anything that had fat, he would put a vitamin E tablet, break it open in there. I was like, okay, well, why not cook it not in the oil and take it to the next step? But that's the name, that's what they are. And it was, so it means to bear birth is what tocopherol means. And that's because it's actually a fertility factor. And so, which is really interesting. I'm sorry. Oh, in the European diet, they get L-tocopherol because they eat mostly olive and sunflower oil. In our diet, we mostly get gamma tocopherol, because we eat mostly soy and corn oil, which is in anything that's processed. And there is a difference, in how well our body changes it. And it's hard to see the difference unless you've taken some organic chemistry. Part of that has to do with the pieces missing there. And there's also, anyway, it's a whole group of family. They all look similar. And they only have this one oxygen, so their water, they don't like water, they're hydrophobic. This is because last year I had a bunch of students who we're taking my organic chem class so we could geek out a little bit on the structures. And so they also, vitamin E, as I mentioned, is a super antioxidant for your cell membranes. It keeps your cell membranes healthy. But over here it talks about, and so for especially women, reproductive health. And that's where its actual name came from. And so that's pretty fascinating. It's also really important for your skin. And so that's where skin healing, scarring and stuff. And that's where most people have probably seen it put into stuff. And so here we see deficiency with women having trouble as much as getting pregnant, it's more carrying to term and stuff, and drowsiness and fatigue goes with all of it. But you can get toxicity that you can over supplement because it's a fat soluble one. And so we see the nausea and diarrhea, headaches, rash, and fatigue. So not having enough, you have fatigue, and having too much, you have fatigue. Yeah, and it repairs the damage, I already mentioned all that. And it slows down aging, our immune system, and you really want to get it from whole foods. So if you're eating a handful of nuts every day or seeds, putting it on your salad, hopefully a lot of you have said you eat a salad every day. So putting whatever your favorite nut or seed on, doesn't matter. I use different ones every day. Red blood cells have a membrane. Everything has a membrane. And so keeping all the membranes healthy in your immune system, your red blood cells are carrying oxygen around. So keeping them healthy is going to allow the oxygen to get to the cells, to the mitochondria, to make the ATP, so you don't have fatigue. But you also need the vitamin D in there. And so not being afraid of the sun, but right, using caution. And so they'll show ads like this where they'll say, if you have vitamin E oil, you're going to always stay healthy and stuff. And then vitamin K. So our last of the four, fat soluble. And I love this picture because this is exactly what I think of when I think of vitamin K, which is your leafy greens. Any of your leafy greens, all of your leafy greens, the darker the better. Do a variety, whatever you find that week that's on sale or happens to look just extra delicious. And again, it's a group. So initially it was ADEK, they found one of each, and then for AEK, they actually are finding that there's many different ones and different ones in different food. So as far as the Ks, there's just 3 of them. And again, it's all carbon and hydrogen. That's what the zigzags are, the carbon and the oxygen are just a small amount. And so K1 apparently is in your leafy greens, and K2 is what's made by your microbiome. So when you feed it your leafy greens, and that's a crazy picture that you all memorized if you took anatomy, or if you haven't taken anatomy to this point yet, you get it memorized, and that's the whole thing. Vitamin K is somewhere in here. This is like those 30 some steps or whatever you memorize of blood clotting, and then you pass the test and you move on, and you don't remember any of that because you can just Google it. But vitamin K is needed for healthy blood clotting. And so eating your leafy greens. I know this because my sister had open heart surgery like 1972. So this is like nobody had it then. She had a hole in her heart, and then 20 years later, they had to repair a valve. So she's on Coumadin, which is a blood thinner. So it's also rat poisoning, but it's a blood thinner. So anybody who has an artificial valve has to be on it. And a lot of people with heart issues. So I'm sure like Laura has people on them, and they don't want their blood doesn't clot correctly, but they don't want it to clot because they don't want stuff to get. And anyway, so whenever she's home and I can't have spinach. because they're like, spinach is too high in vitamin K. The thing that's very interesting to me is I think they have it wrong, but this is my thought, because it seems like the overdosing and all the issues we keep running into with everything is when we're supplementing. And my sister does take multivitamin that does have vitamin K, and yet your body seems to know what to do from natural, but it's not an experiment that would be ethically correct. The other thing, which Regina did mention, and nobody ever talks about vitamin K for bone health. So we all talk about calcium, calcium for healthy bones. You have osteoporosis, it's all about calcium, drink milk. But it's actually your leafy greens, because vitamin K is needed for vitamin D and vitamin K somehow help calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus do their thing. And it is also an antioxidant. It doesn't get the big fame of a lot of the other antioxidants. And right, we're supposed to eat like a gorilla. That was Joel Furman, actually, he used to talk about that we should be eating like tons of spinach, like not a little salad every day. You should really be eating different leafy greens. So you can choose which ones you like. And it's really important for our brain function. And this was something actually Christina mentioned too, is the deficiency you'll find in newborns with a malabsorption or an impaired microbiota. And so we put children on antibiotics. The average 2-year-old has already had 4 rounds of antibiotics. And that is you guys, because you were the generation that we just started putting you all on antibiotics. That every time you had an ear infection or a sore throat, you went to the doctor, your mom took you in and you were put on antibiotics. So before you were 2, you had no microbiome, because every time you're on antibiotics, it's depleting your microbiome. And so there's a huge link between autism and antibiotics given to small children. Those studies were just coming out 3 years ago. But something else happened 3 years ago this month. So a lot of things got sequestered and we're trying to get back to them slowly. Everybody's just like, so here we go. Here's the essentials. These 4 are the ones that in supplements you have to be really careful. Now, when I went through, if you go through certain issues like vitamin A, there might be times that you have to start supplementing, but you're always best to get it any kind of orange food. And this also is kind of a cool one. Like vitamin K, I mentioned, I think of it always with bleeding, but actually does so much more for our body than just that. So we're going to look at the B vitamins, and folic acid gets its own place. Instead of being B9, they give it its own spot. It's so important. We'll get to it. So the B vitamin. Apparently I'm doing the B's next. Really? All right, so that's just names of them, and you guys all talk about and see. This is actually the water soluble ones, and this picture is awesome because pretty much it's saying as long as you eat a wide range of fruits and vegetables, that's also really nice because it's just pretty much everything. And there's our spices. You guys are going to be talking about. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. That's what more people will show up today, but we'll see. And they all have a fancy name that no one really knows, or you might know it while you're in a nutrition class, but these are just different sources, but you can see on the previous one, they all had a lot. B1 was the one from polishing and the refining of all of our wheat and rice and everything that we suddenly lost B. But what the B vitamins do, and I thought it was any of the ones that were vitamins that were water soluble, they were putting them as a B. But they're really what is called a cofactor or a coenzyme. They help enzymes. Enzymes are huge protein, and we have like 1 million of them, not really 100,000 of them in our cells that do all the work. They are the workers of our cells, and these guys help them do their job, and they specifically help with the breakdown of food. So B2 and B3 is the NAD, the NMN and AD thing that helps in, this is the FAD. So these 2 are the ones that carry the electrons from one step to another from your food. Pantothenic acid shows up at one point in the Krebs cycle. And so all of these show up in the breakdown of our food to make ATP, to make energy, not just carbohydrates, but fats and amino acids, protein. They're important for new blood cells, which makes sense. And transporting oxygen to our blood cells, healthy skin, all the vitamins, everything is like anything you research, you all were like, seem to be saying the same thing. To keep our brain healthy, pretty much all of us healthy. And I get to these, what happens to them, but what happened to them, they were there, but then we found out our body actually makes those molecules. We didn't actually need them in a vitamin form. And none of us needed these in a vitamin form if we hadn't processed food like we have in the past 100 years, and especially in the past 50 years. So they no longer are considered a vitamin because our body can make them. They're not actually essential for our cells. Folic acid, which is B9. So folic acid is the synthetic form, and it's what you find pretty much in every dietary supplement. And it's what's put in processed food to say it's fortified. And 50% of us on the planet is actually toxic to us. And folate is the normal form, and I must have a picture of the molecules. So our body in Mother Nature, everything's going to be in the ionized form. So you take 106, this gets driven into you. When I got to teach 105, it got driven in. But naturally found in food, it's in the correct form. And so it's really hard to see. This is actually the form we want, is this form where it's methylated right there is the difference. But that would cost more for them to make it. It does cost quite a bit. It's astronomical. You can find it in like Whole Food stores. You usually have to order it online or through somebody, but this is an allele for gene in genetics, and half of us can't convert the folic acid into this form, which is the form our body uses. And so 50% of people lack the enzyme to do that, and folic acid ends up being toxic to them. I have a neighbor, and we were walking home from a kids class that I teach. She was telling me she's one of these. And I said, well, what happens? Because I was curious, right? Because I get to teach this stuff. She goes, I go berserk. She's like, I become berserker. And I was like, that's a perfect explanation of what happens. Like, if I'd asked a doctor, he would have given me this very clinical or nutritionist. But you ask kids, and kids will tell you exactly how it is. And I sat there and I'm like, well, that would explain like most children, because a lot of kids are really berserker. And it really is. So we're like, when we start feeding them real food, they tend to be much calmer. So my kids class, I have this one boy, and some weeks he's really off the wall. I'm like, what did he have for breakfast? He must have had cereal that's fortified. And I don't know what it is in the cereal that's causing it, but and then this week he was so calm. I'm like, he must have bacon and eggs. And I'm not a fan of bacon. Bacon's a carcinogen, but he's definitely sensitive to this. But there's so many possibilities, but this is huge. And then folate, as Laura talked about beautifully, folate is absolutely important because it helps our neural tube to form. And so the mom has to have the right amount. Your neural tube is the first thing that forms. The very first cell of your body, you want to know, is back here. So at the base of your skull, that's where your medulla oblongata is, and that was your first cell. And that's also where your third eye reflects from, which is really interesting if you look at the ancient yoga. But anyway, folic acid though is toxic, and that's the thing that's really, well, not to everyone, the 50% of people. And so in most supplements, it really is. And so if you're somebody who supplements, go and read the label and see. Wait a minute, you can find it. You have to find ones that are made by like a naturopath. And there you go. It helps our cells to grow. It's actually really good for cancers, especially female cancers, reproductive area cancers, that you get really high doses of the folate of this. And you actually have to get it ordered usually by your naturopath, but it helps balance the homocysteine levels. Somebody had talked about, I talked about it too, but we're going to move on past that. But vitamin B9, but the thing that was interesting, because this is the one that's really been talked about a lot, Dr. Joel Fuhrman actually has a whole bunch of stuff about this. that almost all the B vitamins are given in their highly processed form, rather than in their natural form. And so you always want to try and get it. So these are the ones that are missing. Choline was B4, B8 is inositol, and then B10 is one or the other. B11, there's different names for it. There's actually 3 different B11s out there. And so I don't know which one is the correct one. I'm pretty sure it was carnitine, but looking at some websites from other countries, they say B11 is salicylic acid, and I can't remember what this one is. But those are the ones that are no longer considered essential. B11 is actually a carnitine, if we want to be labeled as carnitine. Our liver actually synthesizes it. Your cat and dog actually do not synthesize it. And so they have to have animal products, or they have to supplement with carnitine. So if you decide to make your animals vegan, then you have to supplement them because they can't make carnitine. And carnitine is needed by your muscles, has something to do with the whole ATP transporting and stuff for your muscles. Anyway, so B12 was actually one of the last ones of the bees to be isolated. This is the lady who actually was the first to create the structure. That's actually like in the good old days, this is only like 50, 70 years ago, without computers and stuff. She's one of the few women who won a Nobel Prize back in the day in chemistry. And so it was, as Angela talked about beautifully, pernicious anemia. And I think it's called pernicious anemia because you don't know you have it. So pernicious means it's this underlying. And so it's not related, it is related to iron, but it has to do with B12. And this is the picture of it, which is just a beautiful molecule. And in the middle is cobalt. And so I think I talked about this. The story I had read in an alternative medical journal was they actually think the reason we need B12 is it's how we deliver cobalt into our body. And as this, it kind of looks, it does look like a heme molecule. I'll show heme in a little bit, but cobalt, there's only 3 elements that are truly ferromagnetic. There's different types of magnetism, but ferromagnetic is extremely magnetic. It means it sticks to your refrigerator. So we all have magnets on our refrigerator. You can go out and find magnetite, which is a form of iron. And cobalt is also magnetic. It will stick to your refrigerator. The only reason I know that is I had a student one time in lab and he said, "Oh, my unknown's cobalt." I'm like, "No, it's not. It says it's," I don't know what I said it was. And he's like, "No, look," and he was really geeky. So he had a magnet and he's like showing me. And so then I went and got the guy who like put all the stuff out, and I said, "Your unknown key is totally wrong," because it was telling me it was something totally different. And I'm like, "There's no way it's the," maybe gonna use, but anyway, so they think what it is that the cobalt in B12 has a magnetic moment and it winds up the iron. So the iron has a magnetic moment. And so then the iron in your red blood cells makes your red blood cells a magnet, like a super magnet. If you've ever looked at a picture of a red blood cell, it's a magnetic field. There's no other way to look at it. It is a magnetic field. Oxygen is magnetic. And so it finds oxygen. So when this is low, your magnetic field of your red blood cells isn't working right, and you're not binding oxygen because the iron isn't going to be wound up correctly. But anyway, these are some of the signs that Angela talked about also. So extreme fatigue, lightheadedness, the same with any type of anemia. And so breathing issues, and their tongue is swollen. Most people don't like to look at other people's tongues, but and so they didn't know what the cause was or the cure. And until they realized that if you gave liver, because liver has everything in it, to these dogs, and then they later found there was this factor in the stomach. And so a lot of people will say, "Oh, you have B12 deficiency," but it turns out it's not. It has to do with this guy, which is called intrinsic factor, which is a sugar, it's called a glycoprotein. So it's just a protein with some sugars on it. And it is what is needed for the B12 to be absorbed into your body. So the B12 is in your digestive tract, and it is the pH of your tummy, that low pH that's needed for this whole thing to happen. And because this probably would not be folded correctly otherwise. And so B12 is one of the things that needs that low pH in your tummy. And so you ponder that, how many people are put on stuff, like all these people, so many, is one of the biggest things is that proton pump inhibitor. So the pH of their stomach is nowhere near low enough. So this is the small intestine. The intrinsic factor has to bind the B12, and then the small intestine will absorb it. But the binding of it, I'm pretty sure, happens in your stomach. And right, if you have a deficiency of intrinsic factor, I had to write this all out for me so I can remember it. So I always get confused because I think doctors always explain it wrong. You're not going to be able to absorb the B12 and you're tired. And then your body, it's not that you're not able to, it says you don't form the red blood cells, but again, it probably has to do with that whole thing with the magnetism, and you're just tired. Your muscles are tired, you're cramping, you're depressed. And when you're fatigued, you are depressed. You have a headache because you don't have energy to do anything. You just kind of want to be lethargic. And then this is Dorothy Hodgkin, who the chemical structure, but she did some other chemical structures. But that's part of why I wanted to show this slide, because she's was a pretty amazing woman. But we need it for our red blood cells, for our DNA, for homocysteine levels, for cell metabolism, ATP. That's a common thing with all the bees and brain, which pretty much was all of those. And this was something I'd asked Angela about. And so there's a couple different forms, and I was busy making my next slide. I forgot to go back over this. So let's see if I have a picture. I did. No, I don't have a picture. Anyway, they all have this part with the B12 that has to do with, they have this extra group with either a carbon group or an O group, OH group. Almost everyone, every supplement is this one. And that beginning is cyanide. So it's a CN group, which is the same thing that makes hydrogen cyanide, which is a poisonous gas. It'll suffocate you. And it's the cheapest form to make, and it is the least absorbable and the most toxic to us. So if you're somebody who takes B12, which everyone's deficient in, so I actually take B12, mine is not this. I think mine's the agnostic, which is the best form of it. That this, your body doesn't really know what to do, doesn't absorb it well and stuff. Although that was the form you showed me that your mom was taking. So everything I think works by a placebo effect that you're told. So the question is, and that's why I have a question mark here, is the myth that's out there is you can only find vitamin B12 in animal products. You can actually only find vitamin B12 because it's made by the bacteria. Animal products are so contaminated with bacteria, that is why. And it's actually made by the bacteria, not inside of us, but in the soil. And that was something I left out with the B vitamins. I barely mentioned it with vitamin K, but it is believed that our microbiome is making a lot of these vitamins for us when we give them the right kind of food. So vitamin B12 is found in the bacteria in the soil. And so that's part of the thing behind you should eat dirt, because when you're eating dirt, you get enough. So in third world countries, they were never deficient in B12. There was enough contamination of the water that people who didn't eat meat never had B12 deficiency. Our soil is so depleted now, especially in this country. One of the videos you have a choice of watching, the guy who's from either New Zealand or Australia, he talked about it. And he like has a whole supplement line because he said there's no way you can get enough B12. But it's the idea, there's a lot of people who say you should just eat the carrots right out of the ground. And I've told you, I tried that, it tastes like dirt, don't do that. It is, that is the question. And it's animals are out there grazing. In the past, they were out there grazing. Most of the meat you're getting, especially in fast food, those animals never grazed. They're like kept on highly processed food. And so you're probably not getting B12, but that's why they show it like this. The cereals, these are going to be fortified cereals, but I don't, do you remember, did they say oysters when you talked about oysters still? I don't remember. And that was at the beginning of the term, so I didn't even think of that, so I just saw that. Yeah, the canned fish, tofu, and I don't know why tofu is, if that's because it's getting fortified. Anyway, So apparently our colon can, if we give it the right food. And that is, I just talked about that, the whole idea of eating dirt, because you're getting more B12. And so it's found in fortified foods. So tofu is fortified. Which is a whole debate, is what kind of B12 is it fortified with. And so if you actually start going and reading the labels, it is, you'll remember, because it's cyanide, it will say at the beginning of colon. And so there's a lot of stuff that our dirt has microbes, and the importance, kids who are allowed to go and play in the mud and like walk around in the dirt, they tend to have much stronger immune systems. They don't get sick as much. And it's really healthy for us to get sick. It gives our immune system a chance. And so finding that time. Yeah, so this is, maybe you can try it, see if you like dirt. Mushrooms also apparently are high in vitamin C. And so when you think of vitamin C, almost everybody thinks of oranges. And so I knew I would forget, and I reminded myself. So my partner actually went out, you can open it, but yeah, it's oranges today. Or apples. If you don't like oranges, there are apples. Right. Or you can have one for frozen. You're like trying to do this passing. Kiwi said somebody a year ago, we started talking kiwis. There's the cherry. So vitamin C is pretty much your fruits are gonna have them, but oranges are big. And this guy has a lot of oasis. And water, I'm pretty sure even if you haven't had chemistry, you know, water is H2O. Some things with OHs, you love water. Yeah, this is interesting that they have nuts down here, which I did not know. Which I never thought almonds were high in vitamin C, because I think of them as fat. So I don't know if that's an error and they just had it in there and the person in the photo shoot didn't know. But this, I love this picture because it's the idea, can you put it in a pill? No, there's a lot of stuff out there that says, and vitamin C is big claim to fame. It's a super antioxidant. It is really important for your skin. That was one of the big things with scurvy and with collagen. So a lot of people are taking the collagen, drinking the collagen water, which first of all, your stomach's going to digest it. But collagen is going to be totally useless. The better way to promote collagen is eat an orange every day or eat any food, eat kiwi, whatever you want. Yeah, I was going to go buy you guys oranges yesterday and it just rained all day. And I walk everywhere and I was like, yeah. And so in a pill, you can take a pill. And Joey had a cold this past week, and so he did do vitamin C. And I went through one time, you can take vitamin C, it's water soluble. You can take mega doses of it. So if you are put on vitamin C, so if you go through a health crisis and you go to a naturopath or somebody, they'll want you to take large doses of vitamin C. Is you keep taking more until you get basically diarrhea, and then you back up. Because that's how you get rid of it. And so you'll find out what your tolerance level is. But that never happens from a fruit because there's no way you could get that much from a fruit. But the idea there is you're just trying to maximize the amount you had. Linus Pauling was told he wouldn't live past 19. He lived until 92, and I have a picture of him on the next one. But the question is, the whole thing with collagen is this long fibrous protein that is your tendons, it is all of your blood vessels, it is your skin, and it is a braid. So it's 3 long proteins that makes a braid. So like when we braid our hair, and that braid stays nice and tight, so nothing leaks through it. If you have vitamin C, because vitamin C keeps everything from damaging it. When your vitamin C levels are low, that braid comes unwound. And so you've seen when the braid comes unwound, and suddenly you're going to have leaky collagen. And so your skin's going to be scarred. But the bigger issue is what's going on inside of you, which is your blood vessels are leaking. And so there's Linus Pauling. He was born on 34th and Hawthorne, and the Linus Pauling house is there because he's a double Nobel laureate. There was only one other double Nobel laureate. Does anybody know who that was? It was a female. You all know her, Maria. think she can go, I have one name, Marie Curie. So she won 2 Nobel Prizes. He won his first one in chemistry for the structure, the alpha helix, and then he would have won a third one, except we took his passport away because his second one was the Peace Prize. Because he was anti-nuclear testing, and he got thousands and thousands of signatures from scientists protesting our government back in 1950. And so our government rewarded this double Nobel laureate by taking his passport away. So he was not allowed to go to England, where he would have figured out the structure of DNA or helped Watson and Crick figure it out. But I love these pictures. I was at my mom's in the summer, and we were getting rid of all her old college textbooks. And suddenly I found she had his chemistry textbook, but it was the second edition. And so that was the only one that didn't get recycled. But he also got kind of kicked out of the National Academy of Science, again, double Nobel laureate, because he became big into what's called orthomolecular medicine, which is the idea that we each have an individual biochemistry. So the amount of vitamin C I can take might be different from you, but he was big into mega doses of vitamins. But he had, I don't remember what the disease was he had, that he was told he would not live to be 20 when he was a young teen. But he was extremely successful. He dropped out of high school. He was a high school dropout because he didn't like history. And so we gave him, after his second Nobel, we gave him an honorary high school diploma from our state governor did that. And I did this once. When you are ill, and it has to be a soluble form. So again, there's ascorbic acid and there's ascorbate. And so there are more absorbable forms. And so it's the ascorbate. Most people who say they can't do vitamin C, it's because it's the ascorbic acid form, which is not how our body wants it. It wants it as ascorbate. But anyway, I had a cold and I had some soluble, it was just vitamin C. You can buy it as a powder. You can go up to, so the recommended amount is only like 15 milligrams a day. And so when you're sick, they'll sometimes say to take up to 5,000, which would be 5 grams. Oh, when you have a cold, you can go up to like 40 grams. Again, you just keep taking it over during the day, but it's because your body is going through that much oxidative stress that I was able to get up to 40 grams, like not in one dose, but over the day before anything happened. And it was pretty amazing. And it's more like with anything like zinc I mentioned, it's more that your body always needs to have high levels. It is much better in the whole food, as you've heard me say, because there's a whole bunch of other things that are not necessarily classified as vitamins in the orange, and they actually all amplify each other. In the supplement form, you're getting usually just that one thing. There's usually, especially in a pill form, there's a whole bunch of binders and things in there. But this is book. And again, getting it in whole food. So even though the orange might only have like 50 milligrams, which is enough every day, you eat that orange every day, you won't get scurvy. Scurvy is back on the rise. And that's where your teeth start falling out, you get these weird ulcers all over your body and stuff. And it's on the rise, and it's really hard to diagnose because there's apparently only one lab in the country. And the doctor has to actually look for it. And that's probably why your friend had trouble getting the B1, because we don't even think about it, but we've overprocessed food. Anyway, it's more absorbable in the whole food form, much more, like 1,000-fold. I thought this was just funny because somebody actually marketed vitamins under his name now. But free radicals we've talked about, so ultraviolet light, inflammation, and there we go, the almighty mitochondria, and there's the true ones, the radical oxygen species. But we're also getting them from all these things. The unfortunate thing that's missing is sugar and fried food, and cooking at high temperatures. But these are all the different sources of free radicals in the background, and hopefully, yeah, I went through it once. And all the things that cause that when you have a plethora of free radicals, so aging, common cold, cancer cells, because of damage to cell membrane, heart, liver, cataract, inflammation, and cancer. And we talked about this quite a bit. And so you do see Ross show up. In fact, when you guys do your research for your spice, because spice are the super antioxidants also, that you'll probably run into stuff. And you won't be as afraid of the literature. So your best defense is, of course, eating whole foods. But if you get something like, let's say, somebody in your family gets cancer, I would tell them to go see a naturopath who will put them on high doses of some of these vitamins during that time to help them, especially if they're going through chemotherapy, because chemotherapy can be is actually extremely toxic. And so you're just trying to support your immune system to help get through it. This is Nanozyme, which is, they're making these nanoparticles. And so SOD is one of the reactive oxygen species is called superoxide. And so when I went to graduate school, Dr. Friedovich, who was this amazing speaker, I mean, his name's just great to say, he was known as Dr. SOD, superoxide dismutase. But now it's like this buzzword out there, and there's whole books written about it and why it's really important for therapy and stuff. Right, and so the antioxidants, you can do it in the vitamin form, or you can do it in the whole food form, and there's chocolate. There's also cinnamon right next to it, and so when you guys do, oh, and there's legumes that you all love so much. Yeah, and there's a bunch, there's antioxidants more than just A, C, and E. So A, C, and E, if I was in a different nutrition class teaching you, you would probably have this as a question, but these are other ones that have been found to be super antioxidants. This is the one in green tea. So that looks like it's basil, actually. One of these that's the one that's in turmeric. Mara will talk about, we'll talk about your presentation in a few minutes. So again, the antioxidant is a free radical missing an electron, and the antioxidant has an extra one to put in there, and it's just amazing. So it's an oxidation reduction. Yeah, and this is like more chlorophyll, so eating your greens. One of these is found in the seaweeds, because there's a whole thing about seaweed is really good. The carotenoids. So eating your colors, just eat colors. That's the whole rainbow week. And that's actually one of the things. So I did open the last two folders. So open this week's and next week's, just so you can see in the ORAC, and you'll run into this. Some of you will, right, because of what you're doing. If you don't like your topic, so Nick, just make sure you talk to me before you leave. I wrote down a couple more, so and we'll talk about that, get through these slides. Oh, melatonin, because if I'm talking about antioxidants, melatonin naturally in your body is your super duper best antioxidant. And it is produced by your body when you go to bed, when you go to sleep, in the dark. So if you sleep with a night light, you got to get rid of it. And there's no way you can sleep in the dark here. There's so much light pollution. So unless you have like $1 million, you can get those blinds that completely block out. I have a blind that's a blackout blind, but I'm not rich enough to have it where it goes and it's like built into the window because light leaks around it. But Joey bought me a super duper. It doesn't have unicorns or anything on it, but it is one that really blocks out the light, and I'm out. And so buy a really nice face mask. It's not going to be a cute one, and you have to. So most of us think of melatonin to sleep. It's that melatonin is produced when you sleep. And that is why sleep is so important, especially this next week, because you guys have finals. You go into finals for your classes. We want to end strong, and you have to have sleep. It regulates your circadian rhythms, which this is the whole thing with that time change. Maybe that was that hour time change. That's why I do it on the weekend, or if you fly across the country or fly halfway around the world. I miss I don't have issues when I went to Nepal. I was fine. But you do a complete flip flop in the day, and you've been on a plane for 24 hours. Everybody I've ever been with, when they come here or go there, they sleep for the whole day. I just I don't know why my body just I'm just so excited to be there. Yeah, when Shristi visited us last year, she slept through the whole day. She didn't know I kept waiting for her to wake up, and then I had to go to school, and she thought it was morning when she woke up and didn't know it was like evening and stuff. But it's a huge antioxidant, so protects from free radicals. So when you're sleeping, your body is repairing all the damage that happened from the day. Our breathing is slowed down, everything's still going on. It is the most powerful antioxidant. I have no idea who came up with this number, but it's so important. And of course, in that pill form, it's not going to work that way. It has to be made. And so my classes told me, no, their face doesn't look more rejuvenated in the morning. I have no idea, but they claim that when you look in the mirror in the morning, you look better than you did the night before. That's true. So when you have low melatonin, your sleep is interrupted. So the question is, what's really coming first? Is it the interrupted sleep is creating the low melatonin, or vice versa? You have to get to the point. So in Chinese medicine, somebody comes in and says they have sleep issues. We ask them like 5, 6 questions, because they're all different. Is it that you're having trouble falling asleep? Is it that you keep waking up? Is it that you wake up and can't fall back asleep? They're almost all related to the heart. And it's different issues. They call it heart fires. So your heart has too much fire, too much heat, or your heart is deficient, so it doesn't have enough. But that makes you really think. And so I had issues with sleep at one point, and it was all completely related to emotional and heart issues. And it just was finally letting go and realizing everything works out. So that's surrendering. Your immune system is suppressed because of the free radical, heart disease, and cancer. So I talked about with the sunlight and breast cancer, there is actually a bigger connection with sleep and breast cancer. People who work night shifts have much higher rates of cancer, all types of cancer. And it is oncostatic, just means cancer fighter. So it is huge at that. And this is interesting. So cancer cells, why they would have this, but it is the melatonin that actually will help to destroy them. People can go through apoptosis apparently somehow. I don't know. But it slows them down. And so it's like the cancer cells want to be normal, but they don't know how to do it. Like we all do that. Like little kids, they want to be well behaved. But it's like you ask a question, they're like, oh, they don't want to answer, right? And they just can't help it. Yeah. All right. There's the molecule. I like molecules. And it looks just like serotonin. There's one, like probably a methyl group that's different, and you need to get a sleep mask. And it can't be a cute one because the cute ones are never good enough. But prostate cancers and autism have the normal melatonin, whatever normal is. Normal should be in quotes, which is really interesting because we put night lights in every baby's room, and then we put them on antibiotics. And so we pretty much set them all up to become autistic. And so no night lights for your kids. Let them sleep in the dark. You need to sleep in the dark. Breast cancer, 1/10 of normal. So what if these people, instead of giving them all this stuff to deal with breast cancer, why don't we just start sleeping with sleep masks? And it was the darkness. My mom will not sleep without her nightlight because she deals with the fear that she's going to fall if it's dark and she gets up at night. And so that's a whole nother issue. But night shift workers have 50% higher rates of breast cancer. And there's also this issue. How much stuff is plugged in your bedroom? How many of you have your phone on at night? And stuff like that, because that's your EMF is electromagnetic frequency, and that interferes with melatonin. So another thing melatonin does is it's how the birds fly. So all those geese, that's how they're staying in that perfect V. As soon as one swerves, they all are doing it. It has to do with it in the electromagnetic field. So 3 years ago, it's also when 5G happened. It's also when COVID happened. So there was a lot of people saying it was 5G that created COVID. There was a lab that created COVID. We're pretty sure of that. But is that what allowed it to happen? That previous pandemic 100 years ago was when radios became prevalent. which would have created another EMF build change. Now we've gotten used to the change and we move on because it's something that's necessary. We all love having 5G. I'm not going back to not having it. I enjoy what I can do with it. So anyway, so bees also, just all the things that are moving by that. There's another one I can't think of. And so there is something with the meditation this week with the blue zones. I didn't give you many specifications, but the idea of meditation or prayer, having positive, harmonious thoughts, it's a really nice way to put it, and the good vibes. And Rutgers in New Jersey, people who meditated had almost, so 100% means double the rate. And so finding, and it doesn't mean you have to sit like this person is for an hour a day. You actually will get to that point. It takes time. And you just won't know. And it might be you initially you have to find what works for you. And it's finding that space to take a couple minutes to do it. And so, right, if you did not notice the difference in those words is that one letter. So medication or meditation, there's no question what we were meant to do. And people who are consistently practicing meditation, that's a 4-fold increase. Your sleep. So many of you in my other class, they keep having this like every time, like we're getting to finals. Think about that if you keep it up, because a lot of you, well, my other class, it's shown up 3 times. And it's really interesting because the first time they all struggle with it. And then the next time you're like, oh, I went back to it. This time it worked much better. And I did this or that. And so if it's laying down, if it's going for that quiet walk by yourself without your phone, or if you have your phone just to listen to music or something. This is actually because mom has the connection to the baby. And if anybody's had children, you know when your kid has an issue before you even hear the crying. But the lullaby, the good vibes, actually creates melatonin, and you live in coherence, which I talk more about in the next lecture. Because we actually have a magnetic field around us, and it's been measured. And so that's our aura. That we talk about, and our heart. It's actually the same magnetic field that's around the planet. And so each organ, each part of us gives off a magnetic field, but we also have our larger magnetic field. And so there's this guy who talks about morphogenic field. This is also like with your animal, that your animal knows, your pet knows you're coming home. And so there's this one guy, he's actually done tons of research with it. That your animals will be like waiting at the door. They know, or they'll start barking and it's like 10 minutes before your parents come home or something, but they know they're on their way, they're like telling you. But right, we're actually made up of vibes. So you're really not matter. You're 99.9999999% empty, which is where the vibrations happen. And you know that when you walk, when people say good words, which is most of your words, you've heard me say it. This is a guy who's been big into looking at the morphogenic field and stuff. And so beyond just the choice of the diet, that was everything of slowing down. And just that slowing down, being more peaceful, the importance of good sleep and being playful, right? And slowing down your exercise too, so it's playful. It was something that Dylan had written in one of the things, and he said because he's blessed to be on the sports team, but we all have our team, we all have our people that we spend time with and how they love playing around and joking with each other. And right, the importance of prayer and breathing and smiling. Vitamin G is not considered a vitamin, but there's actually lots about it. Somebody sent me an email saying, have I ever heard of it? Some places, if you look at like Asian websites, will say vitamin G is ginseng. Ginseng is one of the herbs in Chinese medicine, and it would actually, everybody's very specific if they could handle it or not. It is reserved for extremely severe cases, like somebody's in cardiac failure or something. Well, not failure, because they won't be able to take ginseng, but it would be somebody who is extremely ill and extremely older. It would not be good for me. There's also American ginseng. So the fact that we put ginseng in energy drinks just horrified me, because it actually, to some people, would cause issues. And it's not that it's in a toxic form, it's that everything's giving off different types of vibes. But by vitamin G, they mean walking, and the earth is starting to warm up. So it's not so cold to go out there barefoot. and just walk on the earth. Do that this week. Go out and stand in the mud puddle today. Go out and walk in the mud. It's really an amazing thing, and just giggle and laugh. Yeah, I think Jenna said something about her garden. I don't want to even think about it. The ground is so cold right now that I just don't even want to. And right now it's extremely muddy, but the importance of our greens, and also vitamin G is often talked about as the importance of gratitude. So none of these things you could get in a pill. That picture's there just because I loved it. And it's also spring and the birds are coming back. That was something else Jenna commented in her Blue Zone write-up that, so I was really glad to hear somebody else notice the birds really are. And so go out and just stand quietly for just a minute and the birds will just suddenly be flying past you. And the importance of grace. And I talk about these in my next talk, but can you get it in a pill? Why you want the lucky vitamin? That's funny. The healthy vitamin, the happy vitamin, the laughing vitamin, that would be the one we all need. The importance of just that pure laughter. And that's what I got to do this weekend. And I figured I'd put the picture of me. This was me and the kids doing different tastes and stuff. So the counterpart to vitamins is minerals. And there's more than just these five. These are probably the big five that everybody talks about. But yeah, and I didn't ask anything about the minerals. So you don't really have to write anything down. You can just sit back and remember. What's always missing is chocolate, and I have found it in enough places. I think Jenny, you said you couldn't find anything about chocolate and magnesium. It's definitely, it must be dark chocolate, but I found it in several places where they say chocolate's a really good source of magnesium. But they are. It was really cute because those of you who had minerals, you all had something about how they discovered the element and stuff. But they are going to be found in their ionic form where these are all, I don't know if you noticed, they're all cations, of course, right? Except phosphorus and selenium. But they are found in whole food. And so as long as you're eating your whole food, and again, they're considered essential. And you have it on the next slide because we need them in small amounts and you're going to get them in your diet. So they're called the minerals, but in chemistry, we call them ions or salts. Here's interesting. So boron, boron's really important for plant health, and just more sources of them. So they're a nutrient our body can't produce. And so there's a whole bunch of them. I can't remember how many. Nobody ever talks about them. And they're important for our DNA, to be able to make DNA. Every time we synthesize a new cell, we have to replicate our DNA. And so they're going to be found as cofactors for enzymes. So like the B vitamins were cofactors for enzymes, and they're just in different places for our cells to grow. It's something like all the same stuff. For protein synthesis, which would be for collagen and wound healing, for development and function of the immune cells. Zinc, interestingly, so zinc is a big one for our immune system, and it's actually important for our sense of taste and smell. So my zinc must be low. It's one of the ones, because I found it like different ones, if you have those spots on your nails. Because my sense of taste, I don't know if the kids have better sense of taste to begin with, that I know, and they have a better sense of smell. I think it peaks at 8. So I think we're all past the age of 8, so we're on the downspin. But we were doing dilutions of different tastes and seeing how far we could taste it. And I lost every time to the cute little girls I gotta work with. But this was actually something I found that I thought was funny. So it's obviously, I think that's Chinese. So they're promoting the supplement that is just filled with, and they make it dark green. So they're saying it's coming from a whole food source. There's no way in a supplement it's ever going to be the same. So the idea is that you're eating healthy so that you never have to take the supplements and stuff. The thing that's really interesting about zinc and iron, because they put them in everything together, is that they actually interfere with each other in the supplement form. And so they're both compete in our intestines, however they're absorbed. And so in whole food, you never have that issue. And so the question is why, and it's probably because everything is slowed down by natural fiber. Fiber in a supplement form doesn't do the same thing. It just helps you to poop. But when you take them together in supplement form, like everything on these next 3 slides, it's always in the supplement form. They interfere with each other. And so you're pretty much, and they're put together in everything now, that you're not getting either one because they're interfering with each other. And right, cancer, the other quick note there is cancer is also a deficiency in a lot of your minerals. Again, the best way to get them, the most absorbable way to get them is to eat real food. And right, the processed foods are supplemented with synthetic forms. These aren't going to be synthetic because there's only amino element. But right, you can always get them in whole foods. So iron, I just wanted to mention this again. Mara did an amazing job that you have non-heme sources. So the picture in the background, these are different sources of iron. There's the liver, which because of all the blood, it's bloody. Non-heme, this is, if you notice, it's all the vegetable sources. And heme iron is going to be found only in animal sources. So she said from dead things. But this is that molecule again, which looks a lot like vitamin B12, but this is heme, which is naturally in hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is a huge protein. It has 4 units. And in the middle of each one, you have a heme unit. So there's 4 hemes in every red blood cell, because hemoglobin is pretty much all your red blood cell is. And the center of each is iron. And so when you're getting it from an animal product, it's already like that. But when you get it from a plant product, it's just the iron. And so then you'll see these things and say, okay, well, the heme iron is much more absorbable. And so that's what we need. But it turns out there's a lot of health risks with the heme iron. There's a lot of health risks. And so it's like when you get to the bottom of that, it's like, well, wait a minute. Which one would I want? The one that is going to absorb, but then I'm going to have health risks. And where it is considered, and I have actually a similar story as Mara that I was told I was iron deficient, put on supplements and stuff, and nothing helped. It actually makes you constipated terribly. And they're always usually heme form supplements. This was interesting to me because it says from animal sources only, more efficiently. But over here, even though it's less efficiently, you can make it more efficient easily by eating foods. And if you're already eating it, in these foods are going to naturally be high in vitamin C. One of the things so that's the question. This was the study she talked about, but I wanted to remind you of that when they looked at people who are getting the highest amounts of heme iron, they had higher rates of stroke. And again, I've mentioned stroke is increasing only amongst younger people. And they also had higher rates of heart and kidney disease, which in Chinese, and cancer and diabetes. And so the question then became that this was actually something I really appreciated in the study. Was it the heme iron, or was it their source of the heme iron, which was the red meat, which is going to have a lot of other issues with it? And then this I found from a quick Google search, and that's an advertisement. And so they're going to tell you what you want and what you don't want, which is, hey, you want the heme one, and all these that are non-heme that are synthetic and that you block the absorption. Oh, my calcium. So I already mentioned that zinc blocks the absorption, but so does calcium. Again, that's in the synthetic form. So this picture I absolutely loved for calcium, not because I ever played this game, but there's only a little bit of dairy. Look at all this other stuff, the greens. And Summer did a really good job about talking about that. So back in the beginning, we did broccoli. And so it's found in your leafy green. Keep eating a salad every day. It's found in kiwis and figs. Calcium's like everywhere, and it's found in bony fish. Why? Because you're eating bones. Yeah, and so if you like sardines, go for holy mackerel, which is also really high in your essential fatty acids. The thing is again, like the iron, the plant source is not absorbed as well. But yet, people who don't eat animal products don't have as high a rate of osteoporosis. So I don't know if the cow is as fully as we want to be, but everywhere you go online, there's these ads, and it's pretty much that the milk is going to be poured right into your bones to make your bones healthy and strong. It's also for your muscles and nerves with calcium and deficiencies, your nails. I mean, this would be awful. It also looks like a fungus. Your skin is dry, which we usually don't realize. We always think calcium is about the bones and the teeth. But the thing with fractures, it's not just calcium. Calcium gets all the glory. And so then we put everybody on calcium supplements, which have some serious toxic issues, but muscle spasms, because it's the magnesium, the calcium, the phosphorus, all of these working in synergy, the vitamin D, the vitamin K, helping each other. And so those are all the things that you all know. Calcium, well, osteoporosis is the bones falling apart, more fractures. PMS, everybody is different what the causes are. But if chocolate relieves it, it's magnesium. Cow's milk is one of the biggest causes of premenstrual issues. And most people, when they get rid of dairy, a lot of her issues just disappear. Because it regulates not just muscle contractions of the uterus, but your heart contractions. And yeah, and so as I already mentioned, these all interplay. Hyper means high levels of calcium. You actually will get kidney stones forming. And wait a minute, if you get too much calcium, you're going to get weak bones. Because I thought we were saying you need calcium for strong bones, but they all interfere with each other if you have too much. And right, blood clotting, hardened arteries from too much of the supplement. And iron is like messed up. And actually, they found more heart attacks in postmenopausal women who were supplementing. And it turns out there is no correlation between your calcium intake and your bone mineral content. So go figure. We've all been lied to. We've all like fed into the myth. Magnesium, which is found in chocolate and bananas and legumes and holy cow. And it is magnificent magnesium. Everybody's supplementing. It's like the super supplement. It's in laxatives, and it's like there's books on it. And I'm going to go fast because I need to fix the slides for them. And it does. That was the big point, is why I put it there, is it regulates your calcium and your vitamin D if you have strong bones. That if you're getting it in the supplement form, you're going to tend to have issues. It regulates your blood sugar, migraines. And this is the part that's fascinating, because we think of calcium with bones. 60% of your magnesium is actually stored in your bones, which, right, and your muscles, and a little bit in the soft tissue area. This is, again, another postmenopausal study. I think Jenny talked about this one, but maybe not. Higher bone density if you increase magnesium. They weren't looking at calcium for osteoporosis because there's a lot of issues with too much calcium, that they actually saw the bones were making the crystals to make more bones, and they saw less fractures and stuff. And so there's whole books about magnesium. She could go on forever. I won't let her do magnesium again, but she did a beautiful job last term. Deficiency is actually almost impossible unless you're an alcoholic or certain medications. And these would be some of the issues. So the cramping, and right, supplements actually can interfere with the medications for osteoporosis, but that might be a good thing, that we should have the magnesium. Teaching people to cook in whole food. And these were some of my favorites. Magic Magnesium, Consta-Spend, like the names that they're coming up with for these supplements. The excess supplement will actually cause all the same issues, pretty much. And that one I loved, that you can do a magnesium cream. And toxicity, if you get too much, again, from way over supplementing, you actually can, cardiac arrest, that would be a good thing. Sodium and potassium are interesting. Too much and too little. We're pretty much, there's like a fine line. And it was something, right, and same with potassium, low and high. The two of them actually work together. go to things, if you overconsume potassium, you actually will have low sodium. We piped up about, oh, we take too much sodium. There's actually more issues with low sodium right now because most people are eating way over processed, and then we deal with people not getting enough sodium. So there's this nice fine line, but the two of them are absolutely essential. If you're getting them in real food, you're going to get a nice balance, but they help to get your electrolytes to move. They help your nerves. They help your muscles. And sodium, the big key was sodium. We know sodium increases your blood pressure, and potassium helps to balance it. And so the big study was called the DASH study, and I can't remember what it was an acronym for, but they only reported part of the findings, and more studies have been done and shown that you pretty much have to eat only the Swanson microwavable dinners every night, which has like 5 grams of salt in it. To see this increase in blood pressure, that the low can also cause just as many symptoms. But this is one of the things, right? We'll come back to coffee cheese, that if you wish for good health, you have to ask, why aren't you healthy? Why I rush through those is because what we have coming up is you guys are going, you have your, instead of the final exam, you guys are writing one more paper. A reminder, you have to have 2 scientific studies, and you do need to have at least 1 in your talk. And part of your next 7-day challenge, the recipe you're going to do for the 7-day challenge is you're going to make a recipe with your spice. But I do need to mention, this needs to be a healthy recipe. So if you're gonna make cinnamon muffins, you need to it's not just that has the cinnamon. If it's just loaded with sugar and fat, that's not going to count. And that recipe, you need that as part of your presentation. I also, and this shows up in the folders where I talked about it. To talk about, just have 1 slide. And you can even if you don't have a picture, what was your favorite week? And what was your most challenging week? So for some of you that will be easy because it'll be like the mushrooms, yeah, or the mushrooms were your favorite week. And so we'll have that, you guys will be here. But the thing I wanted to talk about is, so your blue zones is due today, get it in. You guys, we have like 200 points over the next week. That's a significant amount. And so nobody's grade is set. But what you're starting on, if not today, tomorrow, is what was promised at the beginning, is you would come back and do your 3 days again. And so some of you have been getting away with, you just say, hey, yeah, so for this week, I've been eating more blueberries or something. You need to detail what you've been eating. I don't care if you use my form. I don't care how you do it. But just a reminder, I don't need you to do this crazy analysis that you would have to do in a real nutrition class. I want you, right, this is just more crazy analysis. I want you guys to look at it and you can have fun. Say how you're feeling after each meal. Add stuff to it. Add a picture. Some people have been putting pictures of their meals with their stuff. So you take a picture, a beautiful picture, and say, and then I also want you to look back, because you can. That's one of the things that's wonderful with Blackboard. Go back to the first week and look at your first 3 days and say, yeah, there's a difference. It asks you to have 1 to 2 pages where you're talking about it. So it's more than 1 line, but like, did you notice changes throughout the term? And it's up to you. You can do journals like this or like that. You can do pictures. I had a gal last year who did pictures. That was just me. You can also include other things, other activities. So that was just me and the kids. We're all doing stuff. That's my son. That's Candy. Candy was there and her daughter. That's why I also picked. Candy's right there. She's touching her nose. With her tongue. I can do absolutely nothing.
Oh,
That's my kids' class. Yeah, they can all curl their tongue and do weird stuff. I can't do any of that. I had a speech impediment, so it probably had to do with that. But with that, I'm not gonna be able to go back far enough. Yeah, so she's just making a really fun face there. Yeah, so include, it's more than just that. That's kind of what you're doing with the blue zones. Even if you're finishing up the blue zones, a lot of you notice there is more though, because after you finish those 3 days, I'll mention on Wednesday is you have 3 days where you get a look at Dr. Greger's he has this list, and some people are really into it, and he has an app and stuff. And it's not that you, yeah, and just see how you do, because you're gonna spend 3 days, so you want to do just where you do whatever you want with your diet, which was kind of this week. The other thing though I wanted to talk about, I thought was my next slide, but it was the previous one, is you guys are doing presentations. And they're scheduled for this Wednesday and next Monday. And I think I had 5 people who said last week that they thought they'd be ready to go this Wednesday. I'm willing to do them all next week, but we'd have to do them Monday and Wednesday. I'm willing to do them Wednesday, Monday, and Wednesday. Who's actually gonna be ready this one? There's like 4 of you. Yeah. And so there's no way 20 of us can go Monday. So what would happen with next week though is you'll go Monday and Wednesday. If you come both days next week, you'll get some bonus points. If you don't come both days, some of you, it's like, you don't even have to come next week because you could lose the points because you have so many points. So there's like 5 people with a 99% or higher in here. And so they've never had a blip. There are some of you who are right, like you, yeah, wait, did you just say bonus points? I could get bonus points if I come next Monday and Wednesday and this Wednesday. And I know you'll be looking those days, but and that's fine. What I do need to know is who wants to present this Wednesday. And so those presentations, and then that will be probably the first part of class. And then I will do my lecture and stuff. Go ahead, Summer.
Is the paper supposed to be upcoming Saturday?
No, it's due next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What's due this week is your 3-day. Today's the blue zone. I think Thursday will be the homework. So today's notes, which was pretty easy. So we did metabolism last week, because that's the hardest one. And then the pure, whatever we do Wednesday. And then your diet evaluation is going to be due on Thursday also. And then you can see I opened up next week's folder, but the paper isn't due until next week. Okay. And we can talk about that more on Wednesday. I have it due on Monday, but I'm willing to move it to Wednesday. I prefer Monday, but we can talk about that. All right, goodbye. And again, hold on, let me stop.